Why am I in a stone circle? And why did I come on such a windy day? And why is this stone circle a bit modern? Isn't it? It's not unplanned in the modern sense. Look at these. Because the age of Wales we come to now was a redefinition amongst revolutions that we answered to in our own way. And there was a man named Iolo, and he wasn't the greatest man of his age in Wales, but I would say he's the best one that personified the age in Wales. The wind cut in there, so I just need to make a quick note about Iolo. This video is not about him, it's about the age which produced him. But he is so unusual that he could have only existed at one point in all of history, when this older, gentlemanly, collector-type patriotism collided with the American and French revolutions, and specifically in the county he was from, and we'll get to that in the video. As I mentioned about Iolo, this video is in 3 main parts. So we're going to look kind of at what happened before him, leading up and through him with antiquarians, and then the political sense that erupted out of the American and French revolutions. And then we'll look at Iolo, because really he's this weird bridge between the two that could only exist once in all of history, in that specific place that he was from. I haven't gone too much into the antiquarian, the romantic nationalist sense in the last 2 episodes, though I could have, but I did not do so because this age is when it really came into maturity. An unscientific, romantic Welsh nationalism based around the manuscripts. And Iolo, one N. Morgannwg is spelled with 2 N's, but he just wanted to be a bit of his own thing. They saw a new Gorwel, horizon. Iolo invented that word. My camera broke, but we'll put pieces of this in there. However, these antiquarians, these were gentlemen who began to study Welsh culture or Celtic culture broadly as a subject, and this was revolutionary because what they were saying is this was even worth studying and passing down. The English, you can see repeatedly throughout their history, they don't want to think about such things. They don't want Welsh to be a great subject of glory and antiquity, because that would rival their own culture's prestige. They don't want to think about it. They're happy, quite happy to let it collect dust and rust. But beginning earlier, you had men who began looking at this in patriotism of their own roots. And not only here, you had a man over across the water in Llydaw, Brittany, Abbe Pezron, a Breton, who really began looking at how their language, Breton and Welsh, are from the same root, though he went deeper into the Gaulish element and there wasn't as much formal learning yet. He laid the base with his book, 1703, L'Antiquité de la Nation et la Langue de Celt. He was saying we are one people, essentially, we and the Breton, and we sort of are. right around that same time, you had a man named Edward Llwyd, who really gathered together the notion of the Celtic languages and built a study comparing them and formally branched them apart into the Goidelic or Irish and Brythonic or British branches of this family. And he wrote an important work, Archaeologia Britannica, in 1707. This was the foundation of all further Celtic studies. It had begun without any university in Wales. We were doing it anyway. And on his heels, men like Henry Rollins. In 1723, he published his work Mona Antiqua Restaurata. And this was really about stating that the Druids, that pre-Roman religion, was centered around Ynys and the antiquities there that he was bringing to light. Going further, the family of the Pennants and Lewis Morris and his brothers, they began building societies, and they established the London Welsh Society of Cymrodorion in 1751. Cymrodorion means the first part is like in compatriot, kind of like together natives, sort of compatriots, but an intellectual tinge. This gave way to the Gwyn A in the 1770s, and these were much more active and prolific in studying these manuscripts, bringing to light knowledges of our own past from our own viewpoint, not a quietly brushed aside view like France and England had toward our culture. And this was significant. We began publishing works and beginnings of pamphlets about who we were and who we are, and works like John Milton's Paradise Lost would be translated into our language. We were looking at classics again. That Renaissance learning attitude had been momentarily lost, but we were regaining it here. And you had Welshmen like Sir William Jones, see my video on him, who built through the Orient the understanding of the Indo-European language family. A man named Owain Myfyr really did contribute a lot. He produced a Welsh dictionary from 1793 until 1803. That's a substantial work. And his Myfyrian archaeology, published in 3 volumes from 1801 to 1807, attempted to gather all the works of Welsh poetry in the early days before David ap Gwilym in the 14th century into a cohesive volume printed, which we could use to study our own culture. And Iolo Morgannwg was involved in this Myfyrian archaeology. He did some forgeries, however. We'll get to that in a moment. This Owain Myfyr also edited the poems of Llywelyn, which is quite important. These are essentially what we have in answer to saga poetry. It's giving us a grandeur that we sourly missed. But these men making these works were about to collide with a completely new view of the world. We have a couple words for the Enlightenment in Welsh. One of them I absolutely love. Ymoleuo. Ymoleuo. You also have Oes Oleedig. But that Oleo, that means the self. We're in an individualistic eruption of ideas. And we're beginning to reflect a Jacobism. Kind of an anti-Anglican view of the world in reference to our own elite groups. And this made the English authorities very uncomfortable but they were about to be much more uncomfortable in what came next. Politics in Wales begins, really, with the American Revolution. And I don't know how else to look at this but to concentrate on one or two people, because this is about an entire age rather than just this subject. You had a man named Dr. Richard Price, who the historian John Davies said is the most original thinker in Welsh history. He produced pamphlets which were in essence the voice of liberalism. We see Welsh liberalism blooming through him. And I should note he was also from a non-conformist background. This religious sense was important. The non-conformity had taken over the political senses of the Welsh by this point. Dr. Richard Price was deeply influenced and active in the Republican and radical causes of the French and American revolutions. He had communication with people including Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, George Washington, and he was from Llangaenor in Morgannwg, not far from Iolo Morgannwg's patch. With the outbreak of the American Revolution, he published observations on the nature of civil liberty, the principles of government, and the justice and policy of the war with America. That's a long title, but the point, basically, he was supporting of this because of inalienable rights. And he went on really to influence the American Constitution itself. And this was the age of Thomas Paine, the rights of man. It's obvious what that's about. And Common Sense, a pamphlet that inspired many Americans to join the revolution. This was the Enlightenment reproducing itself through the age of the pamphlet. Political pamphlets were able to be printed at speed in ways that even a few decades before were unthinkable. Technology in printing was advancing, and these pamphlets were circulating. These ideas: do we need a king? Do we need to think of religion in this way of Anglican versus nonconformist? Should we all consider ourselves whatever we wish to do? This was very threatening to the authorities, especially if you're kind of that oligarchical ruling caste of public school educated English people in the home counties. This would be a direct threat to your rule, founded a century before in the glorious revolution, that military coup d'etat of landed families. And this oligarchy that was in Morgannwg as well, this was being directly challenged by these liberal group of thinkers, like Dr. Richard Price. He also wrote observations on the importance of the American Revolution and the means of rendering it a benefit to the world. It suggested that the greatest problem facing the American Congress was its lack of central powers, and in this, it's a direct opposition to Edmund Burke, who would really become a founding philosopher of English conservatism. We're seeing a faint suggestion of universalism appear in Welsh thought, which was absent in English thought. And that's, I think, why John Davies said that Dr. Richard Price was so important. There's also a fellow named Jack Glenagors up in Dinbych, which was quite... Just like Morgannwg, this area was producing thinkers and politics, right? He's giving satire. He's a bit more whimsical. There's a bit of comedy. There's a bit more of swagger in his way of looking at the world. And he does a couple important things. He was really presenting the ideas of Thomas Paine to Welsh people through Welsh. He was deeply influenced by the ideas of the French Revolution and egalitarianism. This man was publicly questioning the king. I mean, that was dangerous. Pamphlets circulating. More than once he was threatened by the authorities, but he kept writing anyway. And he wrote something in Welsh that's fantastic. Seren tan gwmwl. That's not how you spell Cwmwl, by the way. It's one M, but just keep in mind it's a bit older, right? So Seren tan gwmwl is a brilliant work. Let me just run through briefly of what this is. It was published in 1795, and it is really a milestone in the development of nationalism and folk nationalism from a literary point of view. It was directly influenced by the Rights of Man by Thomas Paine. Seren tan gwmwl is just, it's flailing kings, bishops and lords. He references Brad y Cylliderion, referencing the treasonous nature of the English of old. He's talking about the Britons and our right to rule the island. He's using egalitarian ideas of the French Revolution and American Revolution to suggest we have a right, and this is very threatening to the English authorities. But in this time, there's a military drumming up of war. I mean, there's wars lasting from 1793 to 1815, wars with France. This causes serious woes. He writes Dic Sion Dafydd, a poem, but it grows and it becomes a label for the Welshman who goes to Englishmen changing his coat, becoming more English than the English. Now I see this in two ways. Yes, you shouldn't just shed your inheritance and your heritage in your country, but we're at the stage where we've lost so much prestige and elite institutions that if you want to advance in the world, what other choice do you have? And he's attacking that. I think without offering an alternative, well, what are you going to give these people so that they can advance into the world? And this is really where Iolo Morgannwg comes in, because he's offering and he's talking about elite institutions in Wales through Welsh. But for the time being, I just want to hammer home the discontent and the dissent that is bubbling up across Wales during these Napoleonic wars. What happened in the Napoleonic era in Wales? You had violent uprisings across Wales. Just look at this. This was serious. we were on the verge of revolution in many parts. I also need to mention that as a direct cause of the British sending in troops and further oppressions, many people simply left to America, especially Rhan Bala, North Powys, Montgomeryshire. These peoples, a lot of them went to Pennsylvania, a lot of them went to help the American Revolution, but then later on to try to establish areas where they could be religiously free. And religion was a serious matter. The Methodists, who had formed a faction within the Anglican Church, and the English authorities, or the English loyal authorities in the north, in Llŷn, Gwyn A, they're complaining that the Methodists have taken over. They're threatening the aristocratic rule even, because the pillar of Methodism is basically, you are your own connection with God, essentially, and that removes the need for this crown authority. And the oligarchy of Eton and the home counties, they don't like this, do they? No. And it's developing even further. You have a Unitarianism develop. Unitarianism does not believe in original sin, which is quite serious for any theological debate. They also don't believe that the Torah, or the Bible part, was directly through God. They believe that it was messaged through man with the interpretation open to mistake. It was very singular, and Ymoleuo really latched onto this later in his life. And it was really flourishing, especially around Merthyr Tydfil. Take note of that this Unitarianism bloomed there, of all places. Because another religion was about to come as well. Now, most people will not call socialism a religion, but I clearly do. Iolo Morgannwg was born Edward Williams, and Morgannwg with two N's. His father was a stonemason. That's important. And he learned to read, watching his father etch these letters into stone. His mother was connected to Welsh gentry nobility, and he was bridging these two worlds. But also Morgannwg, even in his youth, in the late middle of the 18th century, was a cauldron with Welsh and English going back and forth, Toryism winning then falling back again, Whiggism rising up then, nonconformity especially strong towards Cardiff. He was at a center point of all the political and theological and demographic swings of the age, with the closest geographical proximity to the influences in England. And he would often walk across England and then back again. He was a very strange man. I mean, he wrote, we don't even know how much poetry he wrote because he forged so many, claiming some mythical past, because he wanted institutions for our country. It took well over a century for us to work out which of Iolo Morgannwg's forgeries were Dafydd ap Gwilym and which were Iolo Morgannwg. And we may have made mistakes, we're not entirely sure. I mean, this guy was gifted. He was probably as good as Dafydd ap Gwilym himself, and that's the problem. He was good at it, and it's a shame he put so much work into forging other people, their work, rather than purely creating his own work, which would have been stunningly beautiful. but he was trying to create a mythical past because he was inspired by these American and French Revolutionary era people. This was the era of Blake, the Ossian cycle, the Rob Roy bits in the north and in Scotland, of a mythic, noble, savage type of nationalism. And this was our answer to that. You had societies in Lyon, France, Rome, doing similar things with their own countries. The nationalism of Norway has its roots here in this romantic nationalist phase. And it looks, for a moment, like we're going to follow the path of Norway, actually, but we don't. Because of the industry that bubbles up and the population just... We're entering the crucible. Wales is never the same after this moment. The population trebles within a matter of decades. And he began looking back toward this mythical past. Building this was a political act for a minority state. We had none of our own institutions, none. And Iolo Morgannwg, looking at perhaps France and America blossoming through their revolutions, was saying that we should have some kind of revolution and build our own. There's a train. Iolo Morgannwg, in this revolutionary age, was talking about a national library, national museums, institutions, when no one else was, and when it was dangerous for minority peoples to speak of such things. And his inability to create them meant that he had to create something in this. With the London Welsh and the Gwyn A, the intellectual ones of Gwyn A, the foundation, a society, mainly in London, but based out of the north of Wales. And he was a bit perhaps resentful that the northerners had all the attention. But Morgannwg and that area, in its reaction early on to kind of the landed Toryism that had taken root before, that area had re-Welshified. And there was a cauldron of culture waiting to be stoked, and he took advantage of that. And he set up a Druidic order based upon lost knowledge that he had access to. And there's quite a few ancient stones in Morgannwg. Maybe that's where he got it from. But in 1792, he is in London in this circle that are these antiquarians that are being influenced by these American and French revolutions. And in 1792, he establishes Gorsedd Berddyn Ysbrydain. And that means the Poets' Guild. Yeah, the Poets' Guild of the island of Britain. And I think it's really important that we keep that Ysbrydain bit. What he's saying through that is important. We have the inheritance that is British. He's making that very clear, that we are the rightful claimants to this ancient inheritance. And he's using that to drum up support for his idea of the Druids around these stone circles when, we know today that these stone circles predate the Druids by at least 1,000 years, but that's not the point. He's seeing that we don't have institutions. We have these antiquarians, we have people studying our culture, but we don't have that elite group. So instead of laughing at people like Jack Glenagorse did, for those wanting prestige, Iolo Morgannwg's solution is to offer a solution, to offer them a way to be prestigious within our Welsh culture. And these Eisteddfods emerge. Like early on in Pontypridd and Caerfyrddin, this is revolutionary. The authorities don't know what to do. He also was one of the editors on this Myvyrian archaeology. I mean, he's connected to all of these different modern occurrences at the time. He is the essence of his age. Because he bridges all these worlds, he's able to influence all of them, at least in a small bit. And he's drawing influences from each of them to create this new Eisteddfod, this Gorsedd Berth. And the Unitarianism is quite important. In 1802, the Unitarians of South Wales organised themselves at Merthyr. In 1806, local Democrats there, led by Unitarians, formed the Cyfarthfa Philosophical Society. In 1810-1811, the first trade unions appeared on the coal field. And this industrial bit, this was when the Methodists were driven by the Luddites, the people who, that didn't like machines, basically, to leave the church. In the 1820s, the colliers of Monmouthshire organized their first unions, and even dissenters started periodicals. And in closing, I just want to read this bit about Iolo Morgannwg's end. Iolo Morgannwg went back to his vale, Morgannwg Glamorgan, to die in 1826, but he had spent his last years with his son in Merthyr Tydfil, of all places. In the course of his lifetime, he and the people he had tried to shape into a nation passed from one Wales to another, across the most dramatic dividing line in that people's history. So he's leaving us in 1826, just as a new age is erupting, and boy does it erupt. So that's that period in our history, and we come to that explosion of really angry political dissent in the next episode. Hey, if you like that, please consider joining me on Patreon. It really helps the channel, and don't forget to leave a like or a super like. Some of you have done that. That's really helped, and we'll see you next time.